Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Outcome Mapping Learning Community webinar. I'm Jeff Mathias. I'm speaking to you from Christchurch, New Zealand. I'm a steward of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared on the resource webpage on the OMLC site. Before we go any further, I'm about to introduce Gill, but before we go any further, just because we're a small group, let's just unmute yourself. I'll give you a name, and in turn, just a 15, 20 seconds, your name, where you're from, and a couple of methods some methods you really enjoy using in evaluation if you do that. Some methods you'd like to learn if you don't. And I'm just going to go in order of my screen. So Richard, you're up first. Unmute yourself and tell us who you are.
Hi, thanks, Jeff. Lovely to be with you. I'm a steward of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community, a freelance consultant, and I'm joining from the UK, specifically today from the wild Welsh Pembrokeshire coast, which is quite something in this time of year. Yeah, I'm deeply excited by all of the methods we have in this series, so I'm not going to bias it with highlighting any one of them, but I do have a lot of my background in outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. That was
Thanks,
probably
Richard.
too long.
Fine. Steph.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steph. I'm calling in from Leuven, Belgium. And I've also been a steward for a long time and still a board member of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community. And obviously worked a lot with outcome mapping and a lot with outcome harvesting as well. 2017, I founded Voices That Count, which is a collaborative network of experts working with narrative and participatory-based methods for measuring and understanding social impact. And happy to be here. And yeah, looking forward to this session.
Thanks, Steph. Cecilia.
Hi, everyone. Cecilia here. I'm Italian, based in London, UK. And I love many methodologies. The one that resonates with me a lot is the most significant change, as the storytelling is close to my heart.
Cool. Thanks, Cecilia. Nazir.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Nazir, joining from Islamabad, Pakistan. I work as monitoring, evaluation, and learning manager with Global Coffee Platform, which is an organization working in coffee sustainability. Yeah, as Richard said, I also like this whole series of very interesting evaluation methodologies being presented, and had opportunity to work in few, but the topic for today is particularly new. So yeah, excited to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazir. Rachel.
Hi, Zeph. Good to see you again. My name is Rachel from Malaysia. I work in an international faith-based organization. 3 years ago, we introduced outcome mapping put to the entire organizations, but we haven't done any formal evaluation. In my previous work with World Vision Malaysia, when we use a more formal way of evaluation like OECD, 5 evaluation criteria, most significant change and all this. Yep, hope to learn more from this. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. Nice to see you too. Alex.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, good to see you all. My name's Alex. I am Evidence and Learning Manager at Westminster Foundation for Democracy, based down in Brighton and Hove in the UK. And I've probably got more experience with outcome harvesting, outcome mapping, contribution analysis, but really interested to see ways I can improve my practice by drawing on other methods. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks.
Cool. Looking forward to meeting you too. Vera.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vera. I'm based in Finland. I work as a monitoring and evaluation officer in a Finnish civil society organization. We are focusing on youth work and youth rights and meaningful youth participation. So my approach to outcome mapping, outcome harvesting, I have been working for about 10 years now, maybe. And I've been exploring a little bit about most significant change as well, but this approach is quite new to me. So looking forward to hear more.
Cool. And I'm struggling with your name, Oyindamola. Is that?
Yes. Hello, everyone. You can just call me Damola for, in short. A pleasure to be here. I'll make it quick. I'm based in Brussels. I'm in Belgium. I work with an organization called VVOB, Education for Development. I was privileged to be part of the outcomes mapping and outcomes harvesting winter school that took place in Brussels last year. And that sort of like, sparked my interest. While the concept itself isn't new to VVOB as an organization, I however, felt that it was important to develop and deepen expertise and capacity, especially in outcomes mapping and harvesting, particularly because my role involves developing projects, writing proposals, and writing grant applications. And as you know, different funders have different ways of, measuring impact. So just being able to apply those tools to my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Paul Waiswa. I work with one of the grant-making organization based in the US. It's called the Fund for Global Human Rights. And I'm based in Kampala, Uganda. So having worked in the traditional kind of monitoring and evaluation, and recently moved into grant making, obviously there was a shift in what tools, methodologies that are really required to, to make sense of the work I do. And so I'm really interested and curious to learn more or to learn about all these other, methodologies that are really complex, aware, that are really they can really help my program and organization learn about a lot of the work we do through our grantee partners. So I'm really excited to be part of this community and looking forward to connecting and learning about outcome mapping and other methodologies. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Elia.
I'm sorry, I just sent a message in the chat. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, okay, awesome. So I'm Elia, I'm Togolese and I'm based in Senegal. I work in an advocacy firm where we do a lot of advocacy related to health, sanitation, and AI. And I'm fairly new to the different methods as I work in communication. I'm the senior communication officer in my firm. And I'm excited to learn about all of the methods. So yeah.
Thanks, Elia. Welcome. Diksha.
Hi everyone, I'm Diksha and I'm from Nepal and I'm working as a monitoring and evaluation here in Nepal in an NGO. So I work in a climate change and disaster risk reduction area. And I'm very new to monitoring and evaluation. It's been 1.5 years that I've been exploring with monitoring and evaluation, and I'm a bit familiar with outcome mapping and outcome harvesting, and I'm very excited to know about the realist evaluation, though I have like read some theories about it, but not done anything in practical about it.
Thanks, Diksha. Titia.
Hi, my name is Titia. I'm from the Netherlands. I work in monitoring and evaluation for a Dutch government program, or two Dutch government programs, actually. One on improving public service delivery and one on improving policy regarding live events and signal management in government.
Great. Thank you. Welcome. Akolade.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Please can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Akolade Oladipupo. I work with Leap Africa. Leap Africa is a non-profit organization localized in Nigeria, in West Africa. So we have a series of programs that aim at building the capacity of young people just to increase their chances of obtaining sustainable livelihood. So I work at the monitoring, evaluation, research and learning coordinator at the organization. And I have a background in research, so I'm familiar with RCT, randomized control trials. However, my experience in this field has shown me that there are many situations and circumstances that RCT may not be the best to actually apply. So I'm very, very interested in outcome mapping, outcome harvesting, and all the other methodologies on this in this community. And I'm excited to be here and happy to learn. Thank you.
Welcome. Vijita.
Hello, everyone. I'm joining from Hyderabad, India. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm joining from Hyderabad, based in, out of India. And I am a feminist evaluator. I use a lot of gender transformative evaluation frameworks and methodologies. I'm also a board member with COE South Asia, which is the Community of Evaluators South Asia. I've been practicing evaluation for a little over 16 years now. And outcome mapping is one of the approaches that I have used quite a bit in my recent work. And learning a lot about the new approaches and methods that we are learning here. So very excited. Thank you.
Fabulous. Yogendra.
Namaste, all of you. I'm Yogendra from Nepal. I'm representing Nepalese NGO named Eka Nepal, and it creates a platform for the youth connection and community development. So in this field, I'm also a learner, and of course, I got opportunity to learn about it from Jeff and Ira from Taswaki. So in future also, I will get good opportunity to understand about this Montreal evaluation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Yogendra. Nice to see you. Mohammed Samsul.
Yeah, Jeff, good afternoon. I'm Sadi from Bangladesh, currently working with Save the Children in Bangladesh as a male officer, and especially for project focal of Operator Consortium project. So basically, I'm also volunteering as an co-leader of Evaluate Bangladesh and also volunteering with Evaluate Asia. So outcome mapping is not new to me actually. I have been working in Rohingya refugee context in these issues, but it's slightly a little bit. But this time I am learning a lot from all of you, and hopefully in Sri Lanka I will get some more insight actually. So hope for the best through this session, Jeff. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mahesh.
Hi. Hi everyone, I'm Mahesh Krishnan. I'm joining from Thiruvananthapuram, India. So I'm a policy professional specializing in gender responsive evaluation and applied semiotics for political strategy. I have been working as a political consultant where I'm applying semiotic analysis for designing political strategies. I'm also a recipient of the Feminist Innovation in Monitoring and Evaluation by Global Evaluation Initiative, where my research focuses on evaluator capacities in the Asia Pacific. I'm also a core team member with Gender and Equity Network South Asia. So like my main focus is on how to bring different methods that are not used in evaluation into evaluation, and use methods which are used in evaluation outside of evaluation. So I act like a bridge. So yeah.
Great, that's defining bricolage for us. Thank you. And finally, Johar.
Hi everyone. Good morning. My name is Johar Brima, and I'm joining the call from Ghana. I work at an NGO called the Migration and Rights Lab that works to promote safe migration pathways and to prevent human trafficking and smuggling. That is the thematic area, but we also conduct quite a number of research, monitoring, and evaluation for different organizations to assess program impact. And in the past, we've used outcome mapping, a most significant change, and the evaluation of some international development projects. And I'm looking forward to learning more. And the new strategies that will be coming up to enhance our work. Thank you.
Great to see you again, Joha. And finally, Simon, our producer and makes everything run smoothly. Tell us about you quickly.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm the coordinator of the Outcome Mapping Learning Community. I'm happy to produce this webinar today. And yeah, I've worked mostly with outcome mapping, outcome harvesting, but I've dabbled in a few other methods, although I don't count myself as a practitioner of any other methods, just an interested learner. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Simon. But today it's Realist Evaluation, and introduced by Professor Gill Westhorp over on the wrong side of the Tasman Sea in Melbourne, Australia, with the sun still shining, I can see behind you. 2/3 of her presentation is going to be Gill exploring the philosophy, principles, and practicalities of RE, and then she'll talk about combining it with outcome harvesting. And while Gill presents, please stay muted and put your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll have time for discussion at the end. It is a massive pleasure to introduce Gill. She's a professional research fellow at Charles Darwin University and directs REALLY, the Realist Research Evaluation and Learning Initiative. She's also adjunct professor at RMIT University, Melbourne, and a visiting professor at Northumbria University, England. She's co-author of the International Ramesses Publication Standards and Quality Standards for Realist Evaluation and Realist Review, and she's a member of the research team currently developing Realist Economic Evaluation. Gill's also fellow of the Australian Evaluation Society and a member of the advisory board for the Australian Journal of Evaluation. Widely referenced internationally, Gill was named in the top 2% of most influential scientists in her field in the 2022 and 2023 Stanford University listings. She's a legend. Gill's also, you are Gill. Gill's also a wide guide across the terrain of causality, context, and complexity, and brings a mix of thoughtful precision, real-world practicality, and that rare thing, warm humanity. I know, a few years ago, I was outcome harvesting with street kids in Nairobi slums. That's my niche, the borderlands where evaluation abuts lived reality. And Gill found me there and invited me to a team combining realist causal reasoning with outcome harvesting, which is more narrative and constructivist in the way it makes meaning. And we developed REOH and kind of bootstrap theory and practice together, trying to define and stay perfectly true to core principles, yet be fully engaged with our clients' kind of imperfect practice. There's no perfect practice. And that experiment, kind of intellectual rigor meeting real world rubber, is one of my great learning adventures. So as we prepare to celebrate bricolage in Sri Lanka, let's fasten our validative seatbelts and let Gill take us deep into making sense making itself. Over to you, Gill.
Thank you, Jeff, for those much too kind words. I'll just introduce myself very slightly differently. First of all, I don't live in Melbourne and wouldn't live in Melbourne for all the tea in China, as my father used to say. I live in a little rural village in Tasmania, which is an island off the coast of Australia, with a population of 1,600, which is one of the things I like about it. I've been working in research and evaluation for about 25 years now, and most of that time I've been specialising in realist research and evaluation. There's one thing that I want to make really clear before I begin, and that is that realist evaluation, I'm going to talk about evaluation primarily, although there are realist approaches to literature review and to other kinds of research as well. Realist evaluation is not a method. And there isn't a step-by-step guide for how do you do realist evaluation. It's a methodology, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the difference is between a method and a methodology as we go through this presentation. I did my PhD in realist methodology with one of the two guys who invented realist evaluation. And did that between 2002 and 2008. And I've combined realist approaches with other things quite a lot, but I haven't done anything that isn't realist in some way or another for over 20 years now. That, I think, is a statement not of commitment to a particular method, but a commitment to a belief that this is useful. And it's useful because it helps people to understand the work that they're doing and why things are and aren't working in the ways that they expected. So that's what I hope to take you through a little bit tonight. There will actually be 2 pauses for questions, need to be relatively quick. One when I've just done a little bit of kind of introducing the underpinning assumptions, and then another one at the end. So I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get underway there. So I hope everybody is now seeing my screen. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, let me just minimize something else so that I can get to the controls, and we'll see how we go from there. So what I'm going to talk about first is a little bit about realist evaluation, then a little bit about principles for blending, and then a little bit about the project that Jeff mentioned where we combined realist approaches and outcome harvesting. But I want to begin before that with an Australian tradition, which is acknowledging the First Nations people who were the first owners and caretakers of the lands on which we live and work, and by paying my respects to elders both past, present and emerging. And for me, that's the Palawa peoples of northern Tasmania. So a quick introduction to realist evaluation and an even quicker look at outcome harvesting. One slide on outcome harvesting. A little bit of thinking about the underpinning assumptions of different research and evaluation paradigms, where a paradigm means a broad approach linked together all the way through from underpinning assumptions through to methods and including analysis. And then I want to do that because underpinning paradigms change the nature of the questions that we ask and the methods that we use, and therefore the answers that we can find. And then I want to talk a little bit about what you need to do if you're going to blend realist approaches with anything. A quick look at the differences between realist evaluation and outcome harvesting, and then a quick look at the blend that we developed in that project that Jeff mentioned. So I'm going to begin with realist evaluation. Most of the work that I'm presenting tonight comes from a first book called Realistic Evaluation that was written by Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley. It was Nick that I did my PhD with 20-something years ago. They're both now retired, but worked in this area for 25 to 30 years each. Ray primarily in health and Nick primarily in criminology. So they wrote the first book, Realistic Evaluation, that was about realist evaluation. Ray, being unable to help himself, therefore thereafter went forward and wrote another 3 books, one on realist review, which is the realist approach to literature review, another one on realist evaluation, and one on realist social research, because they all require slightly different applications of the underpinning assumptions that I'm going to talk about. I'm really only showing these texts and resources so that you know that they exist and can look for them later if you wish. The 2 books to the left of this screen are not by Nick and Ray. They are compilations by other people, but they have chapters by people working in the Pawson and Tilley tradition. Over on the right-hand side is the realist discussion list link and pages. The Ramesses projects were the projects that developed the international standards for how to do realist evaluation and realist review. And our equivalent of the outcome outcome mapping and outcome harvesting discussion lists is the Ramesses discussion list, available to anybody who's interested in realist approaches. Lots of very useful discussion. It's a searchable archive on the realist discussion list, so there's lots of answers to practical questions there. So I'm going to start the actual content of the presentation by thinking about the underpinning assumptions for realist approaches, and we're taking it all the way down to the level of philosophy. So thinking through, first of all, what do we assume about the nature of reality? And as a school of philosophy, that's called ontology. And these assumptions, as I mentioned briefly before, differ across different approaches to research and evaluation. So in a realist approach, there's a clue in the word realist. We're starting from an assumption that there is a real world out there, which is independent of or interdependent with our interpretations of it. That is not a view that is shared by all evaluation approaches, by the way. As well as the material world being real, realists believe that the social world is real. And one of the definitions of what is real, what does real mean, is that if something can have a real effect in the world, then it in itself is real, whether or not it is material. So gender is real, as distinct from sex being real. Both are real, despite the fact that gender is different in different cultures and communities, and over time, that doesn't stop it being real. We know it's real because it can have real effects. And the same can be said for class and for a whole lot of other social systems that you can't see per se, but they have real effects, so we know that they're real. The next main assumption that we make is that all systems and all social systems are structured and stratified. They exist in levels, and those levels are nested into levels both above and below them, if you like. That means that they are always interacting. And that has huge implications for how we understand how programs cause outcomes, whether and if so, how programs cause outcomes. The next assumption that we make is that all social systems are open systems. Now, what open systems means that things can move in and out of those systems. So if you think of a family as being a social system, new people can join the family through birth or through partnering one of the existing members of the family or marriage. People leave the family through divorce or through death. But other things come in and out of that family system as well, information, resources of various different kinds. And as those things come in and out of that system, they have effects on that system. What that means is that there may be many causes of any one event. And it also means that any event or any happening, any single thing, may have many consequences at many levels of many different systems, because they're all open and they're all interacting all the time. There's nothing we can do to prevent that from being the case. It's one of the reasons why RCTs aren't always the best approach, is because the systems are open and changing regardless of the programs that we are trying to introduce to make them change in particular ways. The second set of assumptions is assumptions about knowledge. So philosophically speaking, it's called epistemology. It took me years to learn how to say it. It's just, what do we believe knowledge to be, and how do we believe that knowledge comes to be? How is knowledge created? Now, there are some philosophical positions that argued primarily in the past, although there are still some people who think this is right, that when we make an observation of the world, that is a direct observation of the world, and it gives us direct knowledge about the world. I'm looking out my window at the moment. I see that the grass is green and that there's a mountain in my view. In fact, there's a whole mountain range in my view. Those things I can assume to be facts. Realists do not agree that we have direct access to knowledge about the outside world. Realists believe that learning and knowledge is created in our own heads, and it's created through the operations in part of the senses, and in part the operations of our brain, but it's also created through our interactions with other people and other institutions, so in social groups. Whenever we have an experience or whenever we're creating an understanding of something, that is always being filtered by whatever it is that is already in our heads. So our existing cognitive structures, the structures that are literally built into our brains, but also by our previous experiences, by our beliefs, our assumptions, our attitudes. All those things are shaping how we understand any particular thing. And language also structures how we understand things because it structures concepts, and so does culture. So there's no such thing as direct knowledge. Knowledge is always being filtered and created through these multiple interacting lenses all the time. Well, that's important in evaluation because we're in the business of creating and producing and translating and transferring knowledge. Knowledge is our product. So we have to be able to think about how is it that we create our knowledge? What do we consider knowledge to be? What do we consider to be legitimate? What do we consider to be credible? Do we think there is such a thing as truth? Is there such a thing as objectivity? All those questions are epistemological questions that we need to be familiar with. What it means in practical terms is that research and evaluation knowledge is always being shaped and structured by our own existing cognitive and social structures. But it's also being shaped by the tools that we use to create that knowledge, because all of those tools, be it a survey questionnaire, an interview guide, whatever it might be that we're using, all of those tools also have their own inherent theories and underpinning knowledge bases that then shape and structure what knowledge we can create by using them. So you put all of that together and you arrive eventually at the conclusion that there is no such thing as final truth or objective knowledge. There simply cannot be, because it's being filtered in so many ways and there are so many things feeding into it. Now, a lot of that looks like a pretty straightforward constructivist approach, but the difference between realists and constructivists when it comes to knowledge is that realists say, but there is also a contribution from that which is real, from the real. So the real regulates knowledge. I often use the example that it's more reasonable to believe that I'm currently delivering a seminar from my office in Tasmania than that I am climbing the Himalayas. And then add, laughing as I do so, or that I would ever be able to climb the Himalayas. Because the real is regulating knowledge, is contributing to knowledge and helping to determine what interpretations are reasonable to make of it, it becomes possible for us to improve our knowledge of the world. We can never achieve final knowledge, but we can get closer to, we can develop better understandings of the world because the real is contributing to the knowledge that we're creating. So those are the key epistemological or knowledge-related assumptions built into a realist approach. The big thing that distinguishes realist approaches from other approaches in evaluation, including other theory-based approaches, because realist evaluation is a theory-based approach, the thing that makes it different is our understanding of causation. How do things get caused? And there are three key ideas that come together to form the realist understanding of causation. So I want you to imagine that I am standing on planet Earth, perhaps on that tennis court, in that by that very luxurious mansion, with a ball in my hand, and I've got my hand horizontal to the ground, and I open my hand. What happens? Well, the ball falls to the ground. Why does the ball fall to the ground? The answer is not because I opened my hand. The answer is gravity. And we know that it's not because you opened your hand, because if I was in outer space and it was possible to open my hand in such a way as to exert no pressure on the ball, nothing would happen. The ball would not fall. The ball would not initially either float away, depending on where I was in outer space, because the gravitational force exerted by my body would be greater than the gravitational force exerted by anything else on the ball at that time. And if I was back on Earth but underwater and I let go of the ball would float because it's full of air, and buoyancy underwater with a tennis ball, buoyancy would outweigh the effect of gravity. So the things that are causing the outcome, either gravity or buoyancy in that example, we call mechanisms. So a mechanism is a hidden causal force, always a process, but of different kinds, that causes an outcome. Which mechanism gets to cause the outcome depends on the context. So when I was on planet Earth and not underwater, gravity was stronger than buoyancy. If my tennis ball had been a helium balloon, that would no longer be true. So the what it is that I do and the fact that I do it, the what it is that I have, in this case, it's a tennis ball, but when we're talking about social programs, that would be the nature of the program. And what I do with it, whether I open my hand or not, those are necessary things for the outcome to be caused or for the outcome to eventuate, but they are not actually what causes the outcome. Mechanisms cause outcomes, and which mechanisms get to operate, which mechanisms get to win, if you like, in a competition between causal mechanisms, is determined by the context. And so we have this heuristic in realist evaluation: context, mechanism, outcome. And it means in this particular context, and I'm going to vary that in a minute, when these particular contextual factors are present, this mechanism or these mechanisms operate, and that's what causes this outcome. It normally takes more than one mechanism firing for an outcome to be created. It often requires multiple features of context in order for a mechanism to operate. So you may have many C's and a couple of M's or 2 or 3 M's for each O, context, mechanism, outcome. That particular understanding of causation is common throughout Western science, but it's not common in evaluation unless you're using realist or realist-informed approaches. So now we need to take this basic understanding of how causation works and translate it over to social programs, because actually we don't hold social programs in our hands and open our hands to let them go. And one of the things that Pawson and Tilley were responsible for was developing this understanding of, well, how is it in general that programs cause outcomes? So first of all, thinking about the idea of mechanisms, things that people do in programs like running training or providing advice and information or providing health services or whatever it might be, those program activities are not mechanisms. And we know they're not mechanisms because we can do the same activity with different people or in different contexts, and we get different outcomes. If it was the same, if it was the mechanism, no, let me start that sentence again. If the activities were the mechanism, we would see the same outcome, but they're not. What Corson and Tilley suggested was that what program activities actually do is provide some kind of resource or resources or opportunities or sometimes new constraints. And those resources, opportunities, and constraints interact with things inside people's heads, their reasoning, their preferences, the norms that they hold dear, their collective beliefs of different groups. And so it is the interaction between resources, opportunities, and constraints and things inside people's heads, which for short we call reasoning. So interaction between resource and reasoning informs different, we hope, decisions or choices. And it is the implementation of those decisions or choices that leads to the program outcomes. So the shorthand heuristic for program mechanisms in realist evaluation is resources and reasoning. And it's the interaction between the two that creates a mechanism, or something that has the power to create change. But we've already heard that mechanisms only work if the context is right. So we need to think about, what does context mean? So if we start with our mechanisms again, that's the same as what you were just looking at a minute ago. We can think about things about implementation and infrastructure that affect how program activities are conducted, but which also affect how people respond to program activities. We can think about things about the individuals, their culture, their gender, the resources they have available to them, their personal and cultural histories that affect their reasoning, their choices. Social institutions, things like the way families are structured and operate, government institutions, education, the economy, religion, all those things affect people's reasoning, choices, norms. There are multiple sets of relationships between people that affect how people respond to programs. Some of those are interpersonal relationships within the program. So they might be relationships between workers and participants, or they might be relationships between workers and management. But they are within the program and they affect the ways that people respond. Relationships external to the program also affect how people respond to things, and in some cases, through peer or family or whatever pressure, either support or undermine the choices that the program thinks people could or should be making. And even if people do make the decisions that the program wants them to make, then there still needs to be the opportunities available and the resources available for people to put those decisions into practice. So one of the examples I use a lot in training in Western countries is programs to help unemployed people get jobs. You can train people until you're blue in the face. If there aren't enough jobs there, then all you've got is better trained unemployed people, potentially better trained, more angry, more upset unemployed people, because the opportunities weren't there for the program mechanisms to be translated into final outcomes. Now, all of those things, implementation, infrastructure, opportunities, resources, things about people, institutions, relationships, all of those are interacting all the time at all different levels of the system, as we said before. And it's the interactions between them that create patterns of program outcomes. For realists, it's theoretically possible that every single participant in a program would have different outcomes. But in fact, what we see is that there are patterns of outcomes, and those patterns are largely socially structured. And what we're trying to do in realist evaluation is to identify what those patterns are and explain them. We're trying to explain why do we see different patterns of outcomes for these different subgroups in different contexts or different settings. Okay, now what that underpinning assumptions and understandings of how things work, how that actually translates into practice in realist evaluation is what's coming up next. And how you combine that with outcome harvesting is going to follow after that. But I just wanted to pause there and see whether anybody had any questions about the underpinning assumptions themselves. And while you think about that, or Jeff checks the chat for me, I'm just going to turn the light on in my room.
Thank you, Jill. She always does this to me. She blows my head apart after talking for a few minutes. Do we have any questions? If you have a question, maybe use the icon and stick your hand up, and I'll ask you to ask the question of Jill. Not seeing any questions. Simon, is there anything in the chat? Oh, sorry, Simon, you've got a question.
I do. I waited to see if anyone else had one first. Is Jill still there? Yeah.
Yeah.
I wondered, you talked about how realist, the ontology of realist, saying that the world, that there are real things. I wondered what the alternative ontologies are. Is that codified? Are there particular other alternative or challenging?
Yeah, there are lots. There are lots, and I don't have time to explain them all, but I am actually going to show you a comparison across a set of different ones in a minute. So if it's okay with you, I will hold that question and answer it in an upcoming slide. To give you a teaser, though, some constructivists would argue that we've got no idea whether there's a real world out there. We can't possibly tell. All we've got is our own knowledge of it and our own assumptions about our knowledge. And we know that they're actually different from each other. So not only do we not know what the nature of the world is, we can't even be sure that there is a world out there. We might all be avatars. So... Sorry, but when Jeff says I mess with his head, I then can't resist the temptation to mess with people's heads. But that's just as one example.
Okay. Any last questions? I'm not seeing any. If you have it, put it in the chat. Yeah, thanks, Jill. Take us on, mess with our heads even more.
Okay. So now I'm going to get into the practical stuff. So if we assume that the same program is going to fire different mechanisms for different subgroups of people in different contexts, and that's going to create different patterns of outcomes, which is what we as realists assume, that leads to the structure of what is known as the realist question. And that has traditionally been phrased as what works for whom, in what context, how and why. Over the years, that's become modified a little. So we now talk about what works. Works there refers to what outcomes are created. So in what respects means, well, what kinds of outcomes? Because we're quite likely to get different outcomes for different groups. To what extent? How strong are those outcomes? Over what duration? How long do the outcomes last? Because some outcomes last for ages, but some disappear. And sometimes we see an increase in outcomes over time. Sometimes we see a kind of N shape where they go up for a little while and then go down again. We are assuming, however, that those outcome patterns are going to be different for different groups of people, and that those different groups of people are going to in some way be in different contexts, and we usually mean different social contexts. Then how and why refers to the mechanisms. And if you're doing realist economic evaluation, then you might always also ask at what costs borne by whom. And that becomes really important if you're in government department that is funding, or if you are a donor and you're giving out grants, what does this cost compared to what that costs? And are they both achieving the same kinds of outcomes for the same kinds of groups or not? Becomes a very significant question. I think that question has often been misunderstood because it's been framed so simply in such plain English language that it's actually open to misinterpretation. So when I'm teaching realist evaluation in longer courses, I am now saying what mechanisms are triggered, which is the translation of how and why, by which elements or aspects of programs, because we need to be able to identify what resources, opportunities, or constraints are being provided, in which contexts or for which population groups, causing what outcomes, and let's be clear there that we are talking about positive, negative, intended and unintended outcomes, to what extent, for whom, and we're expecting variation both in what they are, the extent to which they're achieved, and the balance of positive and negative, etc., for different groups in different contexts. At what costs, in which contexts, borne by whom, and why might the costs differ as well as the program outcomes differ? Oops. When we put that into an evaluation design, so that's the realist question. That's what realist evaluations are trying to answer. How do you go about answering that in a design process? Down the left-hand side of this table, there's a very simplified version of the basic evaluation design process. First of all, you work out what your purpose is. Once you know your purpose, you can work out what your evaluation questions are. If you're using theory-based approaches, as many of us are, but often not people who are using outcome harvesting, then you work out what your program theory is. Once you know all of those three things, purpose, questions, and program theory, then you can think about your methodology and design. Once you know what those are, you can work out your methods. Once you know your methods, you can develop your instruments. Once you've got instruments, you can collect your data and record it. Once you've got data, you can analyze it. And once you've analyzed it, you can report. Don't we wish it really was that straightforward, linear, and simple? Over on the right-hand side of the column, we see, well, what's the slight tweak to those basic processes that using a realist approach develops? So first of all, our purpose in a realist evaluation is always going to be improving understanding. It's a learning-oriented approach. And usually that's going to be to inform decision-making, but that doesn't necessarily mean just by funders or donors or government policy. It could be decision-making by people who run programs. If the information is well enough distributed, it could be information that informs people's choices about whether or not to participate. The questions that we ask in realist evaluation are always going to be realist questions. So they're going to be picking up those bits about what are the mechanisms, for whom is this working, to what extent, what kinds of outcomes, those realist questions. The evaluation questions are going to reflect elements of the overarching realist question. Our program theory takes a particular form. There are variations on this, of course, but usually our program theory is framed as statements about context, mechanism, and outcome. So we have a series of hypotheses when we go into an evaluation that say, we think that for this subgroup of people in this context, this mechanism is going to be fired and create that outcome. But for this other group, in this other social context, we think this different mechanism will fire and create a different mechanism, a different outcome, or it will require a different mechanism to fire for the same outcome to be achieved for this different group. Very simple example, I did quite a lot of evaluation of parenting programs in my early evaluation days. And parenting programs work quite differently for mothers and fathers. Why is that the case? We want to understand what that's about. It's not because men are on average taller than women or physically stronger than women. It's about the social conditioning of women and men in different cultures to parent in particular ways, and that affects how they respond then to parenting programs. The realist evaluation design is always going to be developed so that you can test and refine that theory about how and for whom and in what circumstances your program works or doesn't work. And quite often we design our evaluations to be able to adjudicate between competing theories. So for how come this maths program works, this program that supports teachers to teach maths in different ways to disadvantaged kids, does it work better because it's improving the teacher's mathematical knowledge? Or is it working because it's teaching them how to teach maths in better ways? Or is it working because it's teaching them more about learning inclusion for disadvantaged groups? Those are three different theories about how a program might work. And so the evaluation may need to adjudicate between those theories and or work out whether each of the theories applies, but for different subgroups. Realist evaluation was designed originally to be mixed method. It's actually turned out that it's more often qualitative. I'm an advocate for mixed methods where possible and appropriate. The instruments may need to be purpose designed. You can use existing instruments if they are relevant to the theory that you're trying to test. But most instruments, unless they were specifically designed for it, most instruments don't address context in the realist sense, i.e. things that affect whether or not mechanisms fire, and they don't address mechanisms. They address program activities and outcomes usually. So you often have to develop your own instruments. You need to collect and record your data in such a way that you can analyze outcomes for subgroups. Realists aren't particularly interested in on average outcomes. We can tell you what the average effect is if you want to know in the right kind of evaluation, but it's not particularly helpful. And so you have to set up your data systems in ways that enable you to do subgroup analysis. That will normally be intra-program. So within one program, inter-context. So looking at different contexts or different population groups in comparison to each other and designed according to the program theory that you're trying to test. So the analysis tests and refines the theory about how the program works. And then reporting, there's standards for how you do it, the international standards for how you report realist evaluations. The reports need to be consistent with the methodology. There's no point going through this process of working out how come it works better for this lot than it does for that lot, and then saying on average the effect is this, or it works differently for all these different groups, so do the same thing in response. It's just nonsensical. So the theory has to be refined and included in the report, and usually recommendations need to be tailored to the findings. Okay, so that was quite a long introduction to the underpinning assumptions for realist evaluation and a very quick introduction to the practicalities of how that gets put into place. I'm now going to do the quickest, dirtiest introduction to outcome harvesting that has ever been given in one slide. And I'm only doing it because there might be some people in the group who aren't familiar with it already, or I think most of you are. So outcome harvesting defines an outcome as a change in the behavior, relationships, actions, activities, policies, or practices of an individual, group, community, organization, or institution. And those outcomes need to be defined specifically enough to be verifiable. Outcome harvesting is appropriate, particularly appropriate for hard to evidence outcomes. Things like advocacy. How do you know whether your advocacy program was really responsible for or really contributed to a particular policy change, for example? It is usually conducted, as I understand it, ex post, because it's working backwards from saying these are the outcomes that have been achieved already, And what we want to understand is what the program's contributions to that change were. And the way it was originally developed, it avoids having any initial program theory. It tries to answer the questions: who made something, who made a change, what was the change, and the change should be observable. When and where did the change take place? And how did the project and change agents, so people who were working with or were affected by the project, contribute to the change? And it very often begins by asking the people who are most directly involved in the project or program to say what they think the outcomes are, and then it validates those outcomes by collecting information from other knowledgeable and authoritative but independent sources. So if we were using outcome harvesting to evaluate an advocacy program, we might want to go to the policy officers or the politicians who were responsible for making a particular change, a particular piece of legislation or a change in policy or whatever it might have been, and finding out from them whether or not the program and its change agents contributed to that outcome. You get to challenge my understanding of outcome harvesting at the end in the questions and discussion if you wish. Okay, so we started a bit late, so I'm going to rush through this next part, which is kind of necessary, but I'm moving forward to, okay, we've got these two different approaches, realist evaluation and outcomes harvesting. How do we blend the two? And there are some issues that we need to be thinking through whenever we're trying to blend approaches. Because as I said right at the beginning, when I was talking about realist evaluation's underlying assumptions about the nature of reality, the nature of knowledge, and what it is that our approach to research values, so our research axiology, changes the questions that we ask, the methods that are used, and therefore the answers that are generated, and therefore the use to which those answers can be put. If you start from different assumptions at different levels of philosophy, methodology, or method, that undermines the coherence and the validity and the understandability, comprehensibility of what it is that you're doing and what it is that you find. So you can end up using methods that are inappropriate to your questions because your underpinning assumptions are not coherent. Here, Simon, here's the answer to your question. So across the 4 columns here, we see 4 different research paradigms. What used to be called positivist, but it's become something of a it's not quite a swear word, but it's a term of abuse in some circles. Now we're calling it more empiricist. That's kind of old-fashioned Western science approach. Then we've got the constructivist/interpretivist approach, the pragmatist approach, and the realist approach. And down the left-hand side, you see ontology, nature of reality, epistemology, nature of knowledge, axiology, the philosophy of value, what is it that is valued here, and understandings about causation. I don't want to work my way through all of it in great detail because it will take too long, but you get these slides afterwards. At least I'm happy for you to have these slides afterwards if you want them. And what they show is that each of those boxes is different for each of those different paradigms. So we've got the old-fashioned positivists saying the reality is out there and we can be objective about it. Flat ontology means one single level. What I see is what is there, and that is the nature of reality. Constructivists say, no, we construct our understanding of reality. We don't know whether our understanding actually reflects what is actually out there. And in fact, there are many realities. It's quite subjective. Pragmatists say, actually, don't care. It's our experience of reality that matters more than what reality actually is. And realists say, yeah, reality is out there. And yes, we interpret it and we interact with it and we affect it. And we've got this depth ontology where we're saying there are hidden underlying causal forces that are causing the outcomes that we see. And you can do that for each line. When we think about data, empiricists think there is such a thing as truth or final knowledge. Constructivists say, no, there isn't. There's only interpretations and most of them are valid. Pragmatists say all inquiry produces responses that are fallible, but what we're doing is producing warranted assertions, and realists say, yes, we're producing warranted assertions, but reality is contributing to that, and so forth and so on. The understandings of causation are also different. And those differences, again, I'm not going to go through the whole table, but those different underlying assumptions mean that those different paradigms use different methods, both to collect data. They make different assumptions about what valid data is, and therefore they use different data collection methods, and they use different methods to analyze it, and they make different assumptions about whether or not you can generalize your findings from this circumstance to any other set of circumstances, and they have different standards for what constitutes quality, and they have different understandings about what the role of the researcher is. So for the old-fashioned positivist, the role of the researcher is to report the facts, nothing but the facts. For the constructivist, it's to interpret people's meanings and acknowledge that your interpretation is just another interpretation amongst many. The pragmatist is trying to develop actionable knowledge and solutions. And the realist is trying to explain how come things are working out the way they are in order to inform actionable knowledge and solutions. It is often said that realist approaches are method neutral. That has been misunderstood. You know, it was actually a line from the first book where Pawson and Tilley said something about being wholeheartedly, I can't now remember the term, of course, in favour of using both quant and qual methods was their message, but it got interpreted as you can use any method you like, and that's actually not right. What we have to be doing if we're doing realist work is being consistent with that underlying philosophy of science, the underlying ontology, epistemology, and axiology, and our understanding of causation. If you're not being consistent with those, you're not doing realist work. So if you're blending realist approaches and outcome harvesting, and you want to be able to claim the realist bit, you have to still be consistent with those realist underlying assumptions. And the methods need to be able to answer part or all of the realist question that I walked you through before, and it needs to be consistent with or provide data that is consistent with that understanding of reality and of knowledge. Now, what that means in practice is that some parts of the realist question can only be answered relative to other parts. A mechanism is only a mechanism because it creates an outcome. And a context is only a context because it affects whether or not mechanisms or a particular mechanism fires. So if we believe that the mechanism that we're firing is about changing the value which is attributed to newborn children in a particular culture, or the value that is attributed to girl children compared to boy children in a particular culture, then we have to be thinking about what are the mechanisms that cause that understanding or belief set to change, and in what circumstances and for whom do they change and not change. There's a relationship there between context, mechanism, and outcome, and they always have to be linked together. You can't have just lists of contexts and lists of mechanisms. They have to be put together in configurations, CMOs. So when you're blending a realist approach, or I would argue this applies to any kind of blend, what is it that you need to do in the process? Well, first of all, you've got to start by identifying why you want to do it. What's your rationale for it? Why do you want to blend this with that? You need to identify whether or not you need to develop a new blend. Has somebody else already done it? And if they have already done it, or they're claiming that they've already done it, did they do it well enough? There have been a number of people who have said that they have blended, for example, qualitative comparative analysis, QCA, with realist approaches, but they've done it in ways that I don't believe are consistent with realist understandings, and therefore I would argue they haven't done it well enough, and you have to do it in a different way. If you're going to blend, you need to have experts in the method or methodology involved in the process of developing the blend, because otherwise you will get things wrong. It's really important to spend time clarifying and comparing the underlying assumptions, because that's what, of the two things that you're blending, because that's what enables you to identify any issues that you're going to have to resolve on the way through. We spent months in meetings on and off in the project group that Jeff was talking about beforehand, saying, but hang on, no, that's not what we that's not what we think. We think not. So clarifying and comparing those assumptions is really important. And it can also be important to clarify and compare the use of particular terminology. Outcome in outcome harvesting has a different meaning than outcome in realist evaluation. And it's really important that we understand what those differences are before we start talking past each other, because we're actually talking about different things. You then need to be able to think through the data requirements for each of the two, or because you have to be able to compare whether or not they're the same. You need to think through what the analytical processes are going to be for the data, because they're likely to be different. Once you've got that all worked through in your head, then you can say, well, I think the way that we can bring them together is like this. This is what we think our adaptation looks like. And in that, you need to specify what is it that you're keeping from each of the two things that you're blending, and what are you losing. I then heartily recommend that you get your proposed adaptation reviewed by experts, perhaps in the content of whatever you're going to investigate, but certainly in methodology. Then you can test it out. Once you test it out, you'll need to revise it. And once you've revised it, be transparent in reporting how you went about the process of blending and testing, trialing and refining your blend, because other people are going to pay attention to that and critique your work. The very quick version of the blend that we did in that project that Jeff mentioned, it was an evaluation of a national intermediary organisation in Australia. Intermediary organisations are part advocate organisations, part systems developers, part training providers, capacity builders. We had proposed in our tender for the project that we would blend and create realist outcome harvesting. We had a number of participatory elements within the evaluation. So the staff of the evaluand, the intermediary organisation, and the funder were involved in developing the program theory, identifying the outcomes, and we also developed a rubric for what constitutes good enough, through good, through excellent outcomes of various different kinds, so that we could be transparent in our reporting. The data sources that we had were interviews with people from the evaluand, from organisations in their sector and from other stakeholders. We did a couple of surveys of sector organisations and a lot of documentary analysis. There were two of us who were involved in implementing the evaluation. It was led by Dr. Liz Maggetto, who was at that time working in the Really team, and myself. And we had the Really team plus Jeff and Dr. Rochelle Martin from the University of Otago in New Zealand, who has used both outcome harvesting and realist evaluation in the past. And that was our think team. And we spent months thinking and taking notes and arguing and debating and thinking, and then we put it into practice. As a result of all that thinking and talking, we were able to say, look, there are actually a lot of differences between outcome harvesting and realist evaluation. So outcome harvesting is primarily a method, and its underlying philosophy is not, or was not originally, clearly specified. Realist evaluation is a methodology. Its underpinning assumptions are clearly specified, but the methods by which you will implement them are not specified. The focus, what you're trying to achieve, is different. Outcome harvesting is trying to identify what contribution the project made to change. Realist evaluation is trying to explain, not just identify that, but explain how and why. For whom and in what contexts change occurred or did not. The timing is different. Outcome harvesting is usually ex post and impact oriented. Realist evaluation can be ex ante, ex post, concurrent, impact, economic. You can apply it to anything almost, because it's not a method, it's a methodology. It's a way of understanding the world and thinking through how you will conduct research in a way that is compatible with that. The understanding of ontology in outcome harvesting, I would argue, is flat ontology. There's one level of observable reality that comes from that original insistence that the outcomes all need to be observable. Realist evaluation, as I said before, uses a depth ontology with structures and mechanisms invisible at a different level of the systems in which they work. Outcome harvesting is, depending on who you ask, either constructivist or empiricist. Realist evaluation is realist. The understanding of causation in outcome harvesting is configurational. It says we can see and identify these multiple contributing factors, and when they come together in a particular configuration, we see the outcome. The understanding of causation in realist approach is, the title for it is generative causation. It means the outcomes are resulting from mechanisms firing or not in particular contexts. Outcome harvesting typically excludes the use or development of theory. For realist evaluation, theory is the beginning, the end, and the middle. It's about developing and testing theory, and then looking at what that theory means for practice. The definitions of outcomes are different. The process for verification, outcome harvesting doesn't require a particular process, but it does insist that you must have a process for verifying outcomes. Realist evaluation doesn't actually specify that, but it does assume that your outcomes data is valid data. And the use of contribution analysis is explicit in outcome harvesting and implicit in realist evaluation. It can be included, but it's not required. So there's a lot of things there that are quite different that we're trying to bring together and say, we can do these things together. Oh, really? That's why we spent quite a lot of time having a conversation about it. We did manage to blend it. How did we do that? We did it by setting up a series of data collection methods. We did develop a program theory to start with, because it had to be consistent with, you have to use theory for it to be a realist approach. We then set up there was an agreement that outcomes could be both observable and non-observable, and that they could be sequenced. And then we set up our data collection tools of the various types that I mentioned before, collected the data, did the analysis as much as we would in a realist evaluation, but with a much stronger emphasis on verification than would normally be the case in an evaluation, in a realist evaluation, I mean, sorry. What did we learn by doing it? First of all, it was actually useful to bring the two together, which was a great relief after we'd spent months and months arguing about it. It did turn out to be useful. Being able to capture and verify both observable and non-observable outcomes and sequence them, it actually, capturing both helped us to sequence them, and sequencing them helped us to understand how the change processes were working. The processes of verification were time-consuming and expensive, but it meant that in this difficult to verify or authenticate kind of setting, the outcomes were in fact considered to be credible and well substantiated by both the evaluand and the funder. One of the things that we found difficult was getting people to identify negative cases, so cases where things hadn't worked. We're not sure whether that's a very understandable self-protective element on the part of the evaluand, or whether they simply don't know about the cases in which things don't work because those people don't come back to them. The people who come back to them are the ones for whom it's working. So they have an inbuilt bias. This is my assumption. They have an inbuilt bias by the way the nature of voluntary relationships work for being able to identify positive rather than negative cases. The realist approach enabled us to identify and explain variation in the outcomes. I think you can do that within outcome harvesting, but it's kind of not set up as thou shalt, like that's what we're here to do, is explain the variation. So taking a realist approach helped with that. We did find that you could end up with quite small numbers within very specific subgroups. So if you're, in this case, the intermediary organisation is working with a large number of organisations, but they fall into a number of subgroups. And if you're then talking about the subgroup for whom it didn't work within this subgroup, you can end up with quite small numbers. And that can create issues about protecting confidentiality. So you have to have thought through that. And we had to do some modification of how we were reporting when it turned out to be a bigger issue than we were expecting. We found verification to be resource intensive because we had previously committed to using interviews as our primary method for verification. The reason we committed to interviews was that we wanted to be able to explore context and mechanism, and that requires qualitative data. So we were concurrently collecting our CM data and doing verification of the outcomes through interviews, but it was time and labour and therefore dollar expensive. We did find that there were low response rates in some subgroups of actors who could have been able to verify outcomes. That made it harder for us to verify those outcomes. And we needed to sample for different levels of systems. Intermediary organisations, by their nature, and this is true of many programs, actually work at multiple levels of systems. And so we needed to have sampling of verification sources at multiple levels of systems as well. So those were some of the things that we learnt through our initial trial of our blend of realist outcome harvesting. And that's enough of me talking. You've got 4 minutes. No, over for questions, comments, discussion. I'm sorry to have talked a little bit longer than expected.
Thank you, Gill. That was wonderful. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and then anyone else can stick their hand up. From Steph Dupre, way back when you were talking about patterns of outcomes, Steph says, you talk about patterns of outcomes instead patterns of outcomes instead of outcomes. Could you clarify this a bit further? And the second question from Simon is related to that, so you can answer them in one. Adding to Steph's question, how do you arrive at patterns of outcomes from an observation of multiple outcomes? Who decides what is a pattern and how?
Two excellent questions, of course. So starting with the first bit, what do we mean about patterns of outcomes? In almost any program, whenever it is operated, you will find that for some, I'm going to talk in terms of participants, but it doesn't necessarily mean people. It could mean organizations or systems or whatever. For some people, it works really, really well, and you see the outcomes that you were hoping for. For some people, it kind of works okay, and you see some of the outcomes, but they're not as strong or not as long-lasting, or there's not as many different types or whatever it might be. For some people, it makes no difference to anything, and for some people, outcomes get worse. Now, that is a normal outcome pattern from any program. That's what we should be expecting to see for any program. What happens when we create average outcome statements, particularly in quantitative work, where you say, you know, the effect size was 7%. I used to be in government. I used to receive those reports that said the effect size is 7%. And I'd think, fab, and now what do I do? Because it wasn't telling me anything about who's it working for. What do I need to change to make it better? None of that information was coming through. So that is a pattern of outcomes in relation to that first question there. An observation of multiple outcomes, actually you will find that there are some very positive, some a bit positive, some not at all, and some negative for each of the types of outcomes that you've got. And so you will be able to do that across multiple outcomes, not just across one outcome. Who decides what's a pattern depends on how you designed your evaluation. If this was set up as a traditionally highly participatory evaluation, then it will be the group that has been structured through that process to do the analysis who will be saying, I reckon this is a pattern. Look, this program is working like this for young men with this particular set of experiences or beliefs, but it's actually working quite differently for those slightly older women over there. I reckon I can see that pattern. If it's just been set up as an evaluator or a team of evaluators doing the analysis, then they will decide what the pattern is, but the how, again, comes back to the design of your evaluation. If you've got quantitative data, some kinds of patterns leap out of the data and hit you in the face, you know. Oh dear. For these kids, I'll tell you the story. I started my PhD looking into early Head Start in America. For 10% of children, early Head Start made child development outcomes worse by the time the kids were 3. Now, that's not about participant effects or anything else. Somehow, this program that works on average and is making some kids' outcomes better is also making some kids' outcomes worse. Now, if you've got that quant data in front of you, it's kind of hard to ignore. If you have set up a rubric, then you will use the rubric as your way of organising your data to be able to see what the pattern is against the rubric. So it comes back to what's your evaluation design for how you make that choice about what the patterns are.
Thank you. Thank you, Gill. We're just about at time. Any final questions before we close? I don't see any hands up.
Non-observable outcomes, Alex, might be increases in self-esteem. You can't see it. You can see perhaps manifestations of it, but you can't see it. And so policy person or politician deciding that an organisation is credible, you can't see that. So non-observable outcomes are things that are not visible. They are investigatable, but they're not visible.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I see lots of thumbs up. There's one little comment in the question, which is a yes/no for you, Gill. Is the REOH case published?
Actually, it's a yes, no, don't know question because the answer is I don't know. It's not published as a journal article as yet. I don't know whether the evaluand or the publisher have put the report online. And yes, Cecilia, trust would be a non-observable outcome.
Cool. There'll be lots of other questions that'll come to you. The wonderful book Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy described the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster as the best drink in the universe. You feel like being hit over the head with a gold bar with a slice of lemon wrapped around it. I think Gill Westhorp has just given us a Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster of a webinar. Thank you, Gill. We'll all go to bed with happy thoughts.
I want that published. Thank you, Jeff.
And we'll wake up with RE hangovers. Gill, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for giving your time and your deep thought to us. Wonderful. And thank you all participants for coming, and look forward to seeing you guys in Sri Lanka.
See you all. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Gill.